I thought 20 years of marriage were stronger than any ghost from the past, until I saw my wife smiling at her phone and realized she was messaging the man I'd heard about my entire life. I'm 55 years old. By now, I thought I had weathered every storm a marriage could throw at me. I'd been there for my wife through her darkest nights, through her battle with drinking, through the depression that swallowed her after the birth of our second child, through all the quiet hours when she couldn't stand herself and needed someone steady just to keep the lights on. That someone was me. I never complained about being the anchor. I built the home, the family, the stability. She leaned on me, and I thought that meant something unshakable. Because if love doesn't mean being there when the walls fall in, then what's the point of it? But there was always the shadow, a name I'd hear in passing, in old stories, in the tears she once shed when she drank too much, her ex. A man from her university days who apparently left scars so deep she carried them like tattoos. Aggressive, jealous, manipulative. That's what she told me, and I believed her. So imagine my surprise when, 2 decades later, I found her smiling at her phone because he messaged her happy birthday. At first, she brushed it off. It's nothing. Just old history. Don't worry about it. But I could see it in her eyes, the way her whole face lit up when his name popped onto the screen. That wasn't history. That was unfinished business. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. Would you trust your partner if their toxic ex suddenly came back into the picture? Or would you draw the line immediately? Comment below. I want to know how many of you have faced the same ghost. It started at breakfast. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when her phone buzzed. Not the usual dull ping of a work message. This one she snatched up fast, too fast. She tilted the screen away from me and smiled, almost reflexively, like a teenager with a secret crush. I wanted to believe it was one of her friends, maybe her sister. But then she put the phone face down on the table. My wife never does that. Never. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She nodded. Yeah, just someone from long ago. And that was it. End of conversation. But once you see the crack in the wall, you can't unsee it. For the rest of breakfast, she barely touched her food. She kept glancing at that phone as if it were a lifeline. Meanwhile, I sat there pretending to read the paper, every nerve in my body buzzing louder than the notification she was waiting for. That night, it happened again. I walked into the living room and caught her sliding the phone under a pillow. She jumped like I'd set off an alarm. You hiding something? I asked. She laughed, too quickly, too nervously. Don't be ridiculous. But my gut was already screaming. See, men my age don't play detective for fun. We don't dig through shadows just to feel paranoid. We've been around too long for that. When something feels off, it usually is. I went to bed that night with one thought pounding in my skull. Whoever was on the other end of that phone was taking space in my marriage. And I was about to find out exactly who. Would you have confronted her right there? Or played it cool like I did? Drop your thoughts. I'm curious who thinks I waited too long. What I discovered next wasn't just casual chatting. It was 4 straight days of messages, and a ghost from 20 years ago crawling right back into my life. The next morning, I didn't have to wonder anymore. Her phone buzzed again while she was in the shower. Normally, I'd never touch it. I'm not the kind of man who snoops. I always believed respect meant leaving someone's privacy intact. But respect is a two-way street. And that morning, I felt mine had already been violated. I glanced at the screen. The preview alone was enough to drop my stomach into my boots. A man's name. Not just any name. His name. The one I'd heard in old stories. The ex-boyfriend. She came out of the shower humming, like nothing was wrong. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. So, I started, keeping my voice steady. You've been talking to him? Her face froze. Not guilt exactly. More like she'd been caught halfway through rewriting history. It's not what you think, she said quickly. He just wished me happy birthday. That's all. We were just catching up. Catching up. I repeated. For how long? She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. For days. We cleared the air about the past. That's all. For days. 4 days of talking to a man she once described as manipulative, jealous, controlling. The man who supposedly ruined her college years. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't angry at him anymore. She wasn't even neutral. She was smiling. Almost nostalgic. So now he's just an old friend? I asked. My voice was calm, but inside, my chest felt like a vice. She nodded, almost defiantly. Yes. He's married now. It's harmless. Harmless. That word rattled around my skull like a bullet. A married man messaging my wife every day, digging through their old wounds, and suddenly it's harmless. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. For 20 years, I carried her through storms, believing we had no ghosts left between us. And here she was, smiling at one. "Let me ask you something," I said. "If I started talking to an old flame for 4 days straight, without telling you, would you call that harmless?" Her lips pressed tight. No answer. That silence was louder than any confession. "Be honest, if your spouse started texting an ex for days without telling you, would you buy the harmless excuse? Or would alarm bells go off like they did for me?" I stood up, grabbed my coffee, and walked out the back door. I needed air, distance, anything to stop my hands from shaking. That night, when I checked her social media, I saw his name again, liking every post, dropping little comments, sliding his presence into our lives like he'd never left. And my wife? She said it wasn't such a bad relationship after all. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting an old ghost. I was fighting for my place in my own marriage. I told myself I'd let it go, that maybe I was overreacting. But when a man's gut is screaming, you don't ignore it. Not at 55, not after decades of learning the hard way that instincts don't lie. A couple of days later, I came home early from work. She didn't hear me walk in. From the hallway, I caught her voice, low, warm, almost tender. She was on the phone, and she was laughing. I froze. I hadn't heard her laugh like that in months. "Yeah, I know. It's crazy how we let things fall apart back then. I think about it sometimes too." Her words drifted down the hallway, but they were sharp enough to cut me to the bone. I stepped into the living room, and she jolted like a teenager sneaking in after curfew. "I'll call you later," she said into the phone, her tone flipping from honey sweet to clipped. She hung up, shoved the phone down on the coffee table. "You," I said, my voice low, "were talking to him." She swallowed hard. "We were just finishing the conversation, clearing the air." But I knew better. This wasn't clearing the air. This was building a bridge, backwards, into a past I thought we had buried. I sat down across from her. "Tell me something honest. Do you miss him?" Her eyes darted to the floor. "It's not about missing him. It's about closure. About being able to finally look back without anger." "Closure," I repeated. "Closure is one message, maybe two. Not laughing on the phone like you're 20 years old again." She bristled. "Don't exaggerate. He was an important part of my life. It's not fair to pretend he didn't matter." And there it was. The dagger. He mattered. I felt like an outsider in my own home. 20 years of marriage, 2 kids, a life we had fought to hold together. And I was suddenly competing with a ghost from her 20s. A ghost that apparently mattered more than the man who stood by her through her worst storms. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of her phone on the nightstand. She thought I was asleep when she picked it up and typed in the dark, her face glowing with that same secret smile. I turned over, my chest burning, and for the first time, I wondered if I was enough for her. Have you ever felt like you were competing with someone who wasn't even physically there anymore? Someone from your partner's past? If so, how did you handle it? The next words out of her mouth would gut me. Because soon, she would start saying maybe the past wasn't so bad after all, and that was the blow I never saw coming. I couldn't take the silence anymore. Not hers. Not mine. Not the buzzing of that damn phone every time his name lit up the screen. One evening, after dinner, I finally laid it out. The kids were upstairs, and the house was quiet. Just the two of us and all the words I'd been choking on. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, steady but sharp. "Why are you letting him back in?" She blinked like she didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about. For days of texting, calls, smiles you don't give me anymore. You think I don't notice?" Her arms crossed, her posture stiffened, classic defense mode. "You're overreacting. He's married. It's harmless." That word again. Harmless. Like a knife disguised as a feather. "Married men cheat every day?" I shot back. "The fact that he's got a ring on his finger doesn't make him a saint. And even if he never makes a move, you already crossed the line." Her jaw tightened. "You're making it into something it isn't. We're just talking. That's all. Talking." I leaned forward. "You told me once he ruined your college years. That he was manipulative. That he broke you down. Now you're telling me he's suddenly worth laughing with. Worth sharing your day with? Which version is the truth?" She had no answer for that. Just silence. The silence said it all. I pushed back from the table, pacing the kitchen. My fists were clenched at my sides, not from anger I'd unleash, but from rage I was fighting to keep inside. Do you understand what this feels like? 20 years I've stood by you. I helped you fight your demons. I gave you a life, a family, stability. And now you're giving him pieces of yourself that you don't even give me anymore. Her eyes narrowed. You're twisting this into betrayal when it's not. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her more than I ever could. I pointed to her phone on the counter. He's not just liking your posts. He's trying to weave himself back into your life. And you're letting him. Do you not see it? Or do you just not care? For a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she squared her shoulders and whispered, maybe you just don't understand. That relationship wasn't all bad. And there it was, the sentence that drove the air out of my lungs. What would you do if your spouse started rewriting history with an ex, turning past abuse into some kind of romantic nostalgia? Would you walk, or would you fight for answers? Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't just talking to him. She was rebranding their entire past, and in the process, erasing me. The days that followed were like walking through a house, where every photo frame had been turned face down. The walls were the same, the furniture the same, but the warmth was gone. Every time I looked at her, I didn't see my wife of 20 years. I saw a woman holding a secret flame for a man who should have burned out of her life decades ago. It started with little phrases. Casual at first. He wasn't as bad as I made him sound. Or, I think I was too hard on him back then. At first, I thought I misheard. But no, she was defending him. The same man she once described as jealous, controlling, manipulative. I reminded her of that, word for word. You told me he destroyed your college years, that he made you feel worthless. You cried telling me those stories. Don't you remember? She looked away. People change. Maybe I misremembered. Maybe I was young and dramatic. That sentence hit me like a hammer. Misremembered? 20 years of recounting the pain, the therapy sessions where his name spilled out like poison, and now it was all just youthful exaggeration? It felt like she was erasing not just her past, but the foundation of our marriage. Because I had been the one she leaned on after him. I had been the one who picked up the pieces. And now she wanted to tell me there were no pieces after all. One evening, I came home and saw her scrolling through old photos on her laptop. She snapped it shut when I walked in. Too late. I'd already seen his face on the screen. That was the breaking point. You're not just catching up anymore, I said coldly. You're resurrecting him. And while you're busy painting him as some misunderstood saint, you're making me the villain for even questioning it. Her voice sharpened. Because you are making it worse. You're acting paranoid. Do you really want to police who I can and can't talk to? I took a long breath, trying to keep steady. No, I want to be the man you talk to. I want to be the one you smile at, laugh with, lean on. Not him. Not some ghost from 20 years ago who decided to crawl back into your inbox. She didn't answer, just stared at me with that mix of defiance and guilt that cuts deeper than outright lies. Imagine this. Your spouse not only talks to an ex, but starts reframing that ex as not so bad. Would you see that as harmless nostalgia or the beginning of betrayal? That night, lying in bed, I heard the faint buzz of her phone again. This time I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Because deep down, I knew the line had already been crossed. And soon, she would prove it by hiding the truth behind promises she never intended to keep. I stopped asking questions. Not because I trusted her, but because I didn't trust her answers anymore. Silence became my weapon and my prison. For a while, I thought if I kept my mouth shut, maybe it would all fade. Maybe she'd realize on her own that she was dragging poison back into our lives. But the silence didn't cool anything. It only fanned the fire. One night, I came home late. The kids were in bed, the house dim except for the soft glow from the living room. She was curled on the couch, phone in hand, that same faint smile on her face, the one I hadn't seen directed at me in years. I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, and for a moment, I let myself look at her like a stranger. A woman smiling at a lover's words. Except this wasn't a lover. Not yet. This was something murkier, something harder to name. Emotional cheating. Soul borrowing. She sensed me eventually and tucked the phone under a pillow like a guilty teenager. Late night? She asked. Her tone was light, but her eyes avoided mine. I didn't answer right away. I was too busy swallowing the acid in my throat. Finally, I said, You hiding something? A laugh, brittle and too quick. Don't be ridiculous. But I wasn't ridiculous. I was 55 years old, with decades of hard-earned instincts, and my instincts were screaming. I went upstairs without another word. In bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint vibration of her phone across the room. I could picture the glow lighting up her face as she typed, the curve of her lips as she read his words. I rolled over, my fists clenching under the blanket. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just mistrust anymore. This was survival. Because if a man spends his life giving loyalty, building a home, carrying burdens, and still ends up second place to a ghost from 20 years ago, then what the hell was the point of any of it? Tell me this. If you caught your partner hiding messages, smiling at their phone, and brushing off your questions, would you call that harmless? Or would you say the point of no return had already been crossed? I closed my eyes, but sleep never came. Instead, a single thought drilled itself into my skull. If she can lie about this, what else can she lie about? And when she finally promised me she'd stop talking to him, I almost believed her. Almost. Until the next buzz of that phone revealed just how deep the betrayal really went. The breaking point came on a Sunday night. We'd been circling each other for days, short answers, long silences, the kind of tension that even the kids picked up on. After dinner, when the house finally quieted, she sat across from me at the table and sighed. "All right," she said, almost as if she were doing me a favor. "I won't message him anymore. If it bothers you this much, I'll stop." For a second, I wanted to believe her. I wanted that sentence to stitch the wound closed, to give me back the woman who used to lean on me, not some ghost from her past. "You mean it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She nodded. "Yes, I mean it." And for a moment, I felt lighter. The air in the room thinned, like maybe we could breathe again. Maybe she realized what was at stake. Maybe she remembered who had stood by her all these years. That night in bed, when she curled close to me for the first time in weeks, I almost convinced myself it was over. Almost. But lies don't stay buried for long. The very next day, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. A preview of a message, his name, again, bold and unmistakable. The words froze me where I stood. "I'm glad we're talking again. Feels like old times." My stomach dropped. My ears rang. She hadn't stopped. She just shifted the game. A promise to my face, and a secret in her hand. I picked up the phone. My hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. For days had become a week. A week had become laughter on the phone. And now, after swearing she was done, here he was again, still in my house, still between us. She came out of the shower, humming, and froze when she saw me holding the phone. "You lied," I said flatly. Her eyes widened, but only for a heartbeat. Then her chin lifted, defiant. "It's not what you think. That line's getting old," I snapped. "You said it was over. And here he is again, in your inbox, dragging you back 20 years like nothing in between ever happened." Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We were just talking." "Talking?" I cut her off. "Talking is one thing. Hiding is another. And lying? That's the worst of all." The room went silent except for the sound of my own breathing. Heavy. Furious. Done. What would you do in this moment? Walk away? Ultimatum? Or dig deeper into the truth? Because standing there, I realized silence was no longer an option. That was the night I stopped waiting for her to respect the marriage. From then on, I was going to demand it, or let the whole thing burn. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring into the dark, replaying every promise she'd broken and every smile she'd given to a man who should have stayed buried in her past. By dawn, I knew one thing. Silence had gotten me nowhere. It was time to draw a line she couldn't step over without consequence. The next evening, after the kids went to bed, I sat her down at the kitchen table. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just the cold steel of a man who had run out of patience. "This ends tonight," I said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "You know damn well what I mean. Him. The messages. The lies. You either cut him out completely, or we don't move forward." Her eyes widened like I'd slapped her. Then she laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "You're making ultimatums now? After 20 years, this is how you talk to me?" I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "After 20 years, I earned the right to be respected. And right now, you're giving that respect to him." Her face flushed. "You're being paranoid. You're jealous of someone who isn't even here." "He is here," I shot back. "Every time your phone buzzes, he's sitting between us." Every time you smile at that screen, he's stealing a piece of the woman I married. Don't tell me he's not here. He's been haunting this house for weeks." She froze at that. For the first time, I saw the crack in her defiance. Panic flickered in her eyes, quick and fleeting, but it was there. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she muttered, quieter now. I shook my head. "No, you've been blowing holes in this marriage. And I've patched every damn one of them. Not this time. Either you block him, delete him, erase him, or we're done." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She sat there, torn between pride and fear, and I realized I wasn't the one begging anymore. She was. The silence stretched. Finally, she whispered, "You'd really throw away everything over this?" I stood, steady as stone. "No, you would. I'm giving you the chance to save it. If you were in my shoes, would you draw the same hard line? Or would you give her more rope, knowing it might hang the marriage anyway?" The kids padded down the stairs just then, asking for water, and the moment broke. She excused herself quickly, saying we'd talk later. But I'd already seen it, the fear in her eyes when she realized the ground had shifted. For the first time, she understood I wasn't the one on trial. She was. And soon, the weight of that truth would break everything wide open. The next day, the house was quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. This was the brittle silence before a storm breaks. She barely spoke to me. I barely spoke to her. Every sound, every glance, felt like a test. That evening, I came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of her, untouched. For once, she wasn't smiling at the screen. She was staring at it like it was a loaded gun. I sat across from her. "So?" Her eyes flicked up to mine. Red-rimmed, tired. "So what?" "You know what?" I said flatly. "Did you block him?" Her jaw clenched. "I haven't yet." That was it. The final straw. 20 years of marriage, and she couldn't take one simple step to prove where her loyalty stood. "You realize what that means, don't you?" I said. Her lips trembled. "Don't make me do this." He didn't mean anything. It was just talking. I slammed my palm on the table, hard enough to rattle the glasses. "Then why is it so hard to let him go? Why is just talking worth risking everything we built? Explain that to me." Tears welled in her eyes. She reached across the table, but I pulled back. "Please," she whispered, "don't make this into something it's not." "It already is," I said. "You lied to me. You hid him from me. You defended him to me. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? To know I've been competing with a ghost for weeks? To know the woman I carried through hell would rather laugh with her ex than sit in the same room with me." She broke then, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't want to lose you." "Then prove it," I snapped. "Right now? Block him. Delete him. Erase every trace of him. Or this marriage ends tonight." Her hand hovered over the phone, shaking. She picked it up, scrolled, hesitated, too long. Then finally, with a trembling finger, she hit the button. Blocked. Deleted. Gone. At least on the surface. She looked at me then, like a child waiting for approval. But there was no relief in my chest. No peace. Just a hollow ache where trust used to be. Because once trust is broken, you can't reinstall it like an app. You can't rebuild 20 years overnight. What do you think? Was I right to give her that final ultimatum? Or should I have walked away the moment she lied? That night, we slept in the same bed, but it felt like a fault line stretched between us. She faced the wall. I stared at the ceiling. And for the first time, I realized, even if she'd erased him from her phone, he was still alive in her mind. The next morning, I knew I had a choice to make. Either live with half a marriage, or take back the respect I should have demanded years ago. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring out the window at a yard I'd mowed 100 times, at a house I'd built brick by brick, not with my hands, but with my years, my patience, my loyalty. And it hit me. Everything in this house had come from choices I made. Choices to stay, to fight, to support, to forgive. But the one choice I had never made, the one I had always avoided, was demanding respect. She came down the stairs quietly, her face pale, eyes swollen from the night before. She didn't reach for her phone this time. She didn't try to hide anything. She just stood there, waiting for me to speak. I put down my mug. "Listen carefully," I said. "What happened these last few weeks can't happen again. Ever. You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to lie to my face. And you sure as hell don't get to invite another man into this marriage. If you want this family, if you want this life, then your loyalty is to me, not some ghost from 20 years ago. Her lip quivered. I blocked him. I deleted everything. I swear it's done. I nodded slowly. Good. But understand this. Trust doesn't regenerate like skin. You burned it. And if you ever cross that line again, there won't be another conversation. I'll be gone before you finish the next text. For the first time in weeks, she didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She just lowered her head and whispered, I understand. I studied her, searching for defiance, for hidden excuses. But all I saw was the look of someone who realized too late that they'd gambled and nearly lost everything. Still, I knew the truth. Forgiveness doesn't erase memory. The image of her smiling at that phone will haunt me for the rest of my days. But maybe that's the point. Maybe scars are reminders, not just of the wound, but of the lesson. That night, I lay in bed, and she curled close again, tentative, like she was afraid I'd push her away. I didn't. But I didn't hold her either. The line had been drawn, and she knew it. Be honest, would you have stayed after this? Or would you have ended the marriage right there? I want to know how many of you would have chosen the clean break over the conditional second chance. In the end, here's what I realized. Love without respect is nothing but a leash. And a marriage without boundaries isn't a partnership. It's a slow erosion. I came out of this different. Stronger. Sharper. Less willing to accept scraps where loyalty is concerned. I'm not the man who doubts himself anymore. I'm the man who knows he deserves respect and demands it. If she wants to stay by my side, it's on those terms and those terms alone. Because if she ever looks back again, she won't see me standing there waiting. She'll see me walking away. When I look back on those weeks, it feels like staring into a mirror that's been cracked down the middle. On one side, the man I was, quiet, patient, willing to carry every burden as long as it meant the family stayed together. On the other, the man I became. The one who finally realized that loyalty without respect is just a slow death. I changed. That's the truth. Before, I thought silence kept the peace. Now I know silence just feeds the fire. Before, I thought trust meant never questioning. Now I know trust is worthless unless it's protected. And before, I thought love was enough. But love without boundaries is weakness, and weakness doesn't survive. She changed too, at least for now. She learned that you can't drag ghosts into a marriage and expect them to live quietly in the corner. You can't lie, rewrite the past, and think it won't poison the present. Maybe she learned that the hard way, but she learned it. As for me, I walk differently now. Straighter, sharper. I don't ask for respect. I demand it. And not just from her, from anyone who thinks they can test the weight of what I've built. Because at 55, you stop playing games. You stop begging people to value you. You start drawing lines in stone. So let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have given that second chance? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? Drop your answers in the comments. I want to see how many of you believe in one more chance, and how many of you say, once the trust is gone, it's gone forever. And if you've been through something similar, if you felt the sting of betrayal or the weight of disrespect, share your story. Sometimes the only way we get through these things is by knowing we're not alone. If this story hit you, don't miss what's coming next. I've got more true stories that will make you question what you think you know about loyalty, marriage, and trust. Subscribe so you don't miss them. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Ghosts from the past always come knocking. The real question is, what do you do when they show up at your door?